Hello, everyone. I'm Guy Lancaster, editor of the online Encyclopedia of Arkansas, which is based in the Bobby L. Roberts Library for Arkansas History and Art. The Roberts Library is located in downtown Little Rock across Rock Street from the main library and houses the galleries at Library Square and the Butler Center for Arkansas Studies. During the pandemic, the Central Arkansas Library System branches are offering curbside service for patrons to pick up their library materials, and you can use our Ask a Librarian and Ask a Genealogist service to get your research questions answered via phone or email. Earlier this month, several branches began allowing a limited number of patrons into their buildings for appointment to use computers, fax items, and other services. For more details about all these services, go to cals.org. You can even visit us in the Roberts Library by appointment now. The Roberts Library Research Room and the galleries at Library Square will be open on a limited basis Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 9 to 11 a.m. and again from 1 to 5 p.m. The 9 to 11 a.m. time slot will be set aside exclusively for high-risk populations. During these hours, both the galleries and the research room will take appointments and allow a very limited number of walk-up visitors. For more information on this, go to robertslibrary.org. And of course, we are doing a lot of virtual programming while we're closed, including story times, cooking classes, craft activities, and fun podcasts. You can find most of these programs archived on CAL's YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and search for the Central Arkansas Library System. Subscribe to the channel to get notification when the latest videos are posted, and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to fill your feed with interesting, fun, and educational content. One of the things we're doing at the Roberts Library is collecting your stories, photos, and art relating to the COVID-19 experiences of Arkansans. We did a similar collecting initiative last year during the Arkansas River flood. Please go to robertslibrary.org for more information or to submit your photographs and stories. We do want to hear from you. Your story is important to Arkansas history. Now to this evening's program, titled Epidemic: The Great Influenza Epidemic of 1918 and Its Legacy for Arkansas by Tom DeBlack. Tom DeBlack recently retired after 23 years as a professor of history at Arkansas Tech University. He is a 1969 graduate of Nashville High School in Arkansas and holds a BA from Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas, an MSc from Ouachita Baptist University, and a PhD from the University of Arkansas. DeBlack taught in the public schools in Arkansas for 12 years. He is past president of the Arkansas Historical Association and the Arkansas Association of College History Teachers. DeBlack is co-author of Arkansas Narrative History, now in its second edition, and author of With Fire and Sword, Arkansas 1861 to 1874. In 2016, he published a history of the first 100 years of Arkansas Tech titled A Century Forward, the Centennial Year of Arkansas Tech University. He's currently working on a book on Lakeport Plantation in Chicot County and another on the Brooks-Baxter War. He lives in Conway with his wife, Susan, and their 16-year-old daughter, Susannah. His talk tonight is based upon a chapter he wrote for the book, The War at Home: Perspectives on the Arkansas Experience During World War I, which is available now from the University of Arkansas Press. If you have any questions, feel free to add them into the chat on Zoom anytime during the talk, and we'll have a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. This is also being broadcast on YouTube, but please don't leave any questions there. And now I shall turn this over to Tom DeBlack.
Right, I'm left-handed.
Okay. Let that do it.
Yeah, they can hear us now.
All right. All right. It's a pleasure to be with everyone this evening. Hope you can hear me. We've had a few difficulties here on my end, but I think we'll get through this. I want to talk to you a little bit this evening about this topic, epidemic, the legacy of the great influenza in Arkansas. In late January, early February of 1918, a doctor in remote Haskell County, Kansas, down the southwest corner, you can see on this map, began to see patients complaining of fever, body aches, headaches, and coughing. And he'd seen these symptoms before, and he correctly diagnosed it as influenza. But there was something different about this flu. It was violent, rapid in its progress through the body, and striking more severely among the old and sometimes lethal. And it did not conform to the typical U curve, which infected not only the young and the old at the extremes, but the healthy people in the middle, young and middle ages. And soon the doctor was overwhelmed, and some of his patients began to die. And alarmed, he began to send reports to national public health officials about it. Schools in the county closed, and then in March, the disease disappeared as quickly as it had emerged. The schools reopened and life returned to normal. But the doctor remained concerned. But few outside the county paid much attention. Influenza was not then considered a reportable disease, that is, one that the law required a physician to report. But in fact, what the Kansas doctor had diagnosed was the first strand of what would become a worldwide pandemic that would come to be called the Spanish flu. Now, the flu wasn't Spanish at all. The name stuck when in May of 1918, the Spanish king, his prime minister, and his entire cabinet came down with it. And the Spanish newspapers, not hindered by the censorship that hampered the presses in the warring nations of Europe, really reported on it. What was clear was that there was no inoculation, no flu shot, no remedy, no medicine, no cure. One historian of the disease has noted, quote, "Your best chance of survival is to be utterly selfish and jealously guard your hoard of food and water and ignore all pleas for help." Well, historians still argue over just where and how this flu originated. Both historian Alfred Crosby in his 2003 book, America's Forgotten Pandemic, and John Berry in his 2004 book, The Great Influenza, subscribe to the Kansas hypothesis that I just talked about. In a rural area where people worked and lived close to animals and consumed meat, the virus most likely originated in swine or poultry and spread to humans. And yet the outbreak might have ended right there as well. As John Berry points out, as sparsely populated and isolated as Haskell County was, the virus infecting the county might well have died there, might have failed to spread to the outside world. And that would be so, except for one thing. This was wartime. Located 300 miles to the east of Haskell County was Camp Funston, an Army training camp located on the grounds of Fort Riley just southwest of Manhattan, Kansas. In 1918, it was the second largest Army base in the country, holding an average of some 56,000 trainees. Soldiers inducted from Haskell County trained there. On March 4th, 1918, a camp cook reported sick call with influenza-like symptoms. There's nothing out of the ordinary at an Army base, except that within 3 days, more than 1,100 soldiers were admitted to the hospital with the same symptoms, and thousands more were treated at makeshift infirmaries around the base. 38 men died of influenza or accompanying pneumonia in the camp, a number that, Berry notes, was higher than normal but not sufficiently so to draw attention. Soldiers went home on leave and returned. Soldiers continued to transfer in and out of the camp. Some traveled to other bases on crowded trains. Others sailed for France on crowded ships. And some of those undoubtedly ended up at another large base, this one in Arkansas. That's Fort Riley, Kansas, the Spanish influenza. And you can see the crowded conditions there. Some of those people ended up at another similar camp in Arkansas, and that's, of course, Camp Pike, located just north of Little Rock. Like Camp Funston, Pike had been hastily constructed in 1917, and at its peak, it had about 52,000 men, making it easily the second largest city in Arkansas, trading only Little Rock's 58,000. The first recorded incidence of a soldier reporting to the base hospital with the flu took place on September 23rd, 1918. Still, the hospital administrator was highly concerned. By this time, the War Department had reported 20,000 cases of flu at bases throughout the country. And just 5 days later, 754 men at Camp Pike were sick with the disease. Before the month of September was out, some 7,600 cases of the flu were reported at the camp. On October 3rd, the camp commandant issued a partial quarantine, which he quickly expanded to a complete quarantine. No one allowed to enter or leave the base, but it was too late. By that time, 1,000 soldiers a day were falling ill with the flu. The base infirmary was quickly filled to overflowing, and some of the sick were quartered in barracks, often with soldiers who were still healthy. As Kim Scott, historian Kim Scott has noted, quote, a more effective method of ensuring the spread of the disease could hardly be imagined. And of course, the new recruits continued to arrive daily, further negating the effects of the quarantine. Notices of the deaths began to fill the Little Rock papers, spreading fear throughout the city. On October 13th, Colonel Charles Miller, the camp commander, told Owens and company undertakers in North Little Rock to stop releasing information about deaths to the newspapers. And again, as Kim Scott has noted, quote, the mortician was in no position to refuse the order. His firm held a contract for the post and had been assigned 9 government embalmers just to keep up with the rush. Well, the government, both federal and state, and the U.S. military responded very slowly. The U.S. government didn't want our own vulnerability known around the world. Dr. Michael Osterholm, director of the Center for Infectious Disease and Research Policy at the University of Minnesota, has stated. But those on the ground knew the real story. You ought to see this hospital tonight, wrote Francis Blake, one of the 4 members of the Army's Pneumonia Commission at Pike. Every corridor, and there are miles of them, with a double row of cots, and every ward nearly with an extra row down the middle, with influenza patients and lots of barracks about the camp turned into emergency infirmaries, and the camp closed. There is only, she reported, death and destruction. 7,642 soldiers contracted the flu at Camp Pike in September, and of those, 105 died. In October, another 6,364 soldiers out of the garrison of a little over almost 52,000 contracted disease, and 79 died, bringing the total for those 2 months to a little over 14,000 contracting the disease, and with almost 200 fatalities. Now, historian John Barry believes that Camp Pike played a huge role in the spread of the disease to Europe, noting that 40% of the 2 million American troops who arrived in France disembarked at Brest, France. Barry writes, quote, the first outbreak of the flu with high mortality in Brest occurred in July in a replacement detachment of American troops from Camp Pike, Arkansas. Just up the road, or actually just a little to the east, southeast of Camp Pike, was the small town of Lonoke, Arkansas. And there at Lonoke was a hastily constructed base called Camp Eberts, an aviation training field. And like Pike, Eberts was also hard hit. Eberts, again like Pike, had been built in a hurry with construction of 72 structures beginning in December of 1917 and finishing in the spring of 1918. And at its height, Eberts was home to approximately 2,500 men. When the flu outbreak struck the camp, the base hospital was quickly overrun. Hangars meant for aircraft were converted to hospitals and convalescent wards. Of course, even closer to Pike was Little Rock, about 10 miles away. And being that close, Little Rock received the full brunt of the epidemic. In retrospect, the early reaction to the disease seems amazingly unconcerned. The recently created Arkansas State Board of Health initially did little or nothing to respond to the outbreak. On September 20th, the Arkansas Gazette carried a story in which Dr. James C. Geiger, the United States Public Health Service Officer for Arkansas, said that the new influenza was, quote, simple, plain, old-fashioned la grippe. The pronouncement was even more strange given that the disease had claimed 265 lives in Boston in the first 2 weeks since it had appeared in the city on September 7th. Stated October 4th, Geiger assured the Gazette, quote, situation still well in hand. At the time he made that statement, cities of Little Rock and North Little Rock were reporting 506 cases of the flu. And the next day's paper reported an additional 296 cases. But that same day, Geiger told the Gazette, quote, this disease has reached its highest point, and the number of cases will begin to decline from now on. Geiger concurred with the conclusion of the State Board of Health that a mandatory quarantine was not needed. Quote, a general quarantine is both unwise and unnecessary. Geiger told the Gazette on October 6th that such drastic measures, if they were necessary, the United States Public Health Service, which has the interests of the people always in mind, would have declared a quarantine before now. 2 days later, with 1,800 cases being reported around the state, the Arkansas Board of Health did just that. The quarantine consisted of 5 points. All children younger than 18 would be kept off the streets, and parents would be held accountable. The congregation of people anywhere in the county was forbidden, which meant that schools, churches, and all public gatherings of people were closed. It strongly suggested that all people finish their business transactions and return to their homes immediately. Farmers were told to go home and not enter town for the immediate future. Only immediate family, preacher, and necessary pallbearers could attend funerals, and finally all doctors were to report cases of the Spanish flu daily to the county health officer. Well, it's difficult to determine the exact figures, but by October, it's clear that the disease had struck Little Rock in epidemic proportions. Citing the records of the U.S. Surgeon General, Kim Scott wrote, quote, out of a population of approximately 58,000, Little Rock reported 9,813 cases of influenza during the month of October alone, and of those 351 died. Scott put the situation in central Arkansas in some perspective, pointing out, quote, 1 out of every 4 people reported sick in September and October. Every man, woman, and child must have either had the influenza themselves or knew someone who did. But by the end of the month, the epidemic had begun to taper off in the capital city, and quarantine rules began to be gradually lifted. On October 25th, the State Board of Health announced that local boards would be permitted to resume church services, and colleges were granted permission to resume classes as conditions indicated. Public schools were to remain closed, and children under 18 were restricted to home. The following day, stores in the capital city were again allowed to remain open on Saturday evenings. And very importantly, pool halls were permitted to reopen, albeit, quote, for players only. On November 4th, the quarantine for Pulaski County was fully ended. But the end of the quarantine in Pulaski County did not signal the end of the epidemic in the state. Fort Smith, the state's second largest city with a population of over 25,000 in 1918, there the flu was not declining by late October. A report from the city dated October 23rd reported, quote, 84 new cases of Spanish influenza reported here today, a marked increase over the past several days, and 23 more than reported yesterday. Indications the epidemic is not abating. It goes on with 2 deaths. The state's institutions of higher learning were also impacted by the outbreak. Classes at the University of Arkansas, which generally started in mid-September, were delayed for about a month, opening in late October. Many students were already on campus, including future Arkansas Congressman Brooks Hayes, who was returning to campus for his junior year. He found the campus, quote, transformed into a military enclave. And this is from Hayes. Surrounding the YMCA hut just west of the Arkansas Avenue, Dixon Street intersection in the southeast corner of the campus, a small city of frame barracks had sprung up to house the newly formed Student Army Training Corps. Uniformed guards positioned at the campus main gate barred anyone from entering unless they had a pass signed by Major George Martin, the university commandant, who shared administrative powers with University President John C. Futrell. The quarantine did not sit well with Hayes' girlfriend and future wife, Miriam Prather, who was making plans to come to Fayetteville by train to visit him. If you're in quarantine, can't you meet the train? She wrote in a letter dated October 3rd. I don't want you to be in quarantine. Well, Brooks Hayes would soon get out of quarantine, but not in the way that his girlfriend had hoped. Within days, a significant number of his fellow students were in the school infirmary with severe cases of the flu. And soon the infirmary was filled, and 6 soldiers were forced to remain in the barracks. Eventually, about half the contingent of 600 soldiers came down with the disease. An urgent appeal went out to the local community for pillows and bed sheets, and later 50 women with or without medical training to help nurse the sick. Hayes made a speedy recovery, but 6 of his comrades died. Colleges around the state were also impacted. In early October, the 2nd District Agricultural School at Russellville, today's Arkansas Tech University, as well as the public schools, were suspended indefinitely by order of the State Board of Health. And the Russellville Courier reported on October 10th, the epidemic of Spanish flu, which has been sweeping the country and the county the past few weeks, has reached Russellville. There are hundreds of cases in Russellville, and there were 62 absent from high school on Monday. In Magnolia, the 3rd District Agricultural School, today's Southern Arkansas University, was also impacted. School President Albert Austin canceled classes, and some students went home, leaving only about 45 on campus. Still, almost everyone remaining on campus, students, faculty, administrators, and staff, were stricken with the disease. With the adults ill, the few students who managed to avoid the illness were left to fend for themselves. Amazingly, given the widespread nature of the epidemic, there were no fatalities on the campus. Galloway Women's College in Searcy shut down for 2 weeks in early October. It resumed classes on October 23rd, but the school remained under quarantine, and local students were not allowed to attend. Approximately 100 students contracted the disease, but none were reported to be seriously ill. The Gazette reported, owing to the shortage of nurses, President J.M. Williams and Mrs. Williams, with members of the faculty, worked day and night. And the paper reported, while there's been a large number of cases in Searcy, the majority were in a very light form, and there have been only 2 deaths in town from the malady. In Arkadelphia, 6 deaths had been reported by the middle of October. The Arkansas Democrat reported on October 21st, quote, work at Ouachita and Henderson Brown colleges has not been retarded a single day by the flu, although a large percent of the students have had their case, most of which were light. 1 serious case has been reported at each college, but these are on the road to recovery. Still, the colleges were under quarantine, with dormitory students restricted to campus. The Student Army Training Center at both schools were also under quarantine, and those who became ill were taken to a special hospital. The experiences at Conway, another multi-college town, demonstrated the capricious nature of the epidemic. The establishment of the Student Army Training Center campus on the Hendrix campus forced the college to postpone its opening until October 3rd. A record 400 students enrolled for classes, but the semester had barely gotten underway when the flu hit the campus hard. By October 9th, there were over 200 cases at the school. Shortly thereafter, President J.H. Reynolds closed the school. As the outbreak appeared to subside, Reynolds announced that the school would reopen on October 15th. On October 14th, SATC members Tabor Bevins of Boonville died of complications of the flu. The following day, another SATC soldier, James Craddock of England, Arkansas, died. The death caused Reynolds to postpone the reopening to October 29th. And this poster honoring those who lost their lives. But while the epidemic ravaged Hendrix, cases at the Arkansas State Normal School remained low, and work there continued largely unimpeded. This is today's, of course, University of Central Arkansas. By December, a few cases had been appeared at the school, and officials at the school gave permission to all students to withdraw until after the Christmas holiday. However, only about 40 students took advantage of the offer, and classes continued without interruption. So 2 very different cases in one town, and not a very large town at the time. The major impact on the campuses of Normal School and Central College was the compulsory quarantine that was in effect in Conway and throughout the state from October 8 until November 4. By this time, Fayetteville had some good news to report. The October 23rd edition of the Fayetteville Daily Democrat and the headline, "Flu Epidemic at U of A Nearly Eradicated." And the accompanying article noted that the 300 and some odd men who had been ill at University Barracks Base Hospital and Infirmary all have been discharged except 45. All but 5 now on solid food, and none of the 5 is in a dangerous condition. Well, while the stories of Little Rock and Fort Smith and the state's institutions of higher learning provide interesting case studies, they were not typical of Arkansas as a whole. In 1918, the state remained almost 80% rural, defined as people living on the farm or in small towns. At Nashville, in southwest Arkansas, with a population of about 2,500, the public schools opened as normal in late September. October 9th, the headline in the Nashville News read, quote, "Big crowd will hear Sousa Band, city's largest crowd expected Saturday," and it urged people from all parts of Howard County to attend the concert with proceeds to go to the war effort. But the concert never took place. A special from the Nashville News to the Gazette dated October 14th read, "On account of the statewide quarantine against the assembling of crowds, the Liberty Loan rally, which was to have been held here Saturday, was called off." It went on to note, "Up to date, no cases of Spanish influenza have been reported here." A second article noted, "No quarantine has been made on the schools, churches, and theaters here to date, as no cases of Spanish flu have been reported in the community." That changed quickly. A headline in the October 16th issue of the Nashville News read, quote, "Quarantine placed on county." And the accompanying article noted, quote, "Dr. D.A. Hutchinson, the Howard County Public Health Officer, announces that all Howard County is being placed under official quarantine to halt the spread of the Spanish flu." A subsequent edition of October 23rd restated the quarantine rules and announced that Lieutenant R.B. Magee, a scientific assistant of the United States Public Health Service, had arrived to assist Dr. Hutchinson in enforcing the quarantine. It restated again the 5 rules, and Magee warned all violators, including doctors, that failure to report cases were subject to punishment by federal authorities. The article concluded by noting the disease was spreading rapidly, and new cases were developing daily. Well, these reports from October 14th that there were no cases of the flu in the county, and subsequent October 16th that the disease was spreading rapidly are hard to reconcile. Was the local paper or the state government suppressing news about flu, or did it just break out incredibly suddenly? It's impossible to say with any certainty. Anecdotal evidence makes it clear that the flu was present in the county and that it was deadly. Leo Purrier, just shy of his 6th birthday in October of 1918, when his entire family, mother, father, 5 brothers and sisters, were stricken by the disease. Young Leo remembered that a neighboring family would bring food to the family and place it outside the house near their mailbox, and then holler to alert the family that food was there, and also for them not to come out until the neighbors had left. All the Purriers survived, but Leo's son, Frank Purrier, remembered that later in his father's life, he would point out a nearby house and relate the story of 5 children in one family who died of the disease. In southwest Arkansas, at Texarkana, with a population of about 8,000, the town was also hit hard. And counties there indicated clearly that wealth, status, youth, or spiritual leadership had no impact on who was stricken. In its October 24th edition, the Gazette reported several deaths from pneumonia developing out of the Spanish flu have occurred in Texarkana within the last 24 hours. Among this number is J.D. Williams, a former treasurer of Miller County, who died last night, age 40. Texarkana was famous, of course, because it did straddle the state line between Arkansas and Texas. And this postcard pokes a little fun at the bigger state to our southwest. Man in Arkansas with his ass in Texas. Of course, never to be outdone, Texas responded with, "I stand in Texas with my ass in Arkansas." The dispatch from Fordyce in south central Arkansas to the Gazette on October 14th read, quote, "The schools are closed, no church services will be held, no public gathering allowed until the influenza epidemic is checked. Dr. Atkinson has been sick for several days, and the other doctors have all the work they can attend to." Thus far, only one death has been reported. As stats from CrossIt noted, a total of 125 cases of influenza have been reported here. Some of the cases very serious. A report from Hardy on October 24th announced, on account of the influenza, the meeting of the Tri-County Teachers Association, consisting of the teachers of Sharp, Lawrence, and Randolph counties, has been postponed. And reports from around the state indicated that almost all of Arkansas was suffering from the epidemic. Coal Hill, the influenza here is improving, only 500 cases remaining. Physicians badly overtaxed. Calico Rock, because of the influenza situation, the Calico Rock Fair has been postponed. Piggott, on account of the influenza, Judge Dudley has notified jurors not to appear for the Civil Division of Court. Guion, the Spanish flu, has a grip on this place. There being approximately 50 cases in town. England, up to Tuesday, deaths from Spanish flu have been 48, 13 white and 35 Negroes. Local physicians say the epidemic among Negroes is increasing. Land, Southwest Arkansas. The flu seems to be on the decline. For one of material, we guess 25. We guess our folks have not taken the flu yet, although our colored man, Robert Muldrow, and all his folks have it. In much of the state, particularly in the more populated areas, the epidemic had largely subsided by mid-November. But in the southern counties and more remote areas, it was still raging. In Pine Bluff, November proved to be a particularly devastating month. In the weeks between November 20th and November 27th, a second wave of the disease hit the city, with 440 new cases reported and a population of just under 20,000, although these cases tended to be milder in nature than the previous incarnations. The Pine Bluff Graphic announced in December the Elks Christmas party for poor children will not be held this year on account of the flu. And the Graphic announced on December 15th, there'll be no church services today. The flu situation has decidedly improved, but the ban will not be lifted for several days. By late November, the situation was so bad that Dr. Garrison warned that another statewide quarantine might be in the offing. Some have speculated that this November flare-up may have been a second or maybe even a third, somewhat milder strain of the flu. A few unfortunate persons managed to be stricken twice, providing further evidence that the November outbreak may have been a mutation of the initial virus. Again, Tim Scott has noted, quote, just when this second wave of the epidemic ended, depended on where in Arkansas you lived. A soldier returning home to Gentry on December 20th found the epidemic had passed. While a few miles away in Braddock, the situation was so bad that a new quarantine was ordered. At the beginning of the new year, 1919, the epidemic had largely run its course in the state. Officially, it claimed over 7,000 lives, though that figure almost certainly is low, perhaps dramatically low. Like many disasters, the epidemic brought out the best in many people. All across the state, doctors and nurses worked themselves to exhaustion, and in so doing, made themselves even more susceptible to the disease. Dr. Christopher Columbus Gray of Independence County had so many patients that his two eldest sons were drafted as his chauffeurs. While making his lengthy rounds from house to house, the overworked physician got what sleep he could in the back of the car. 5 doctors died in Fayetteville. Exhaustion on the part of physicians may have contributed to the absence of a bedside manner in a doctor from Center, Arkansas, who told a flu sufferer he was treating, quote, this is my 25th case, and I've lost the first 24. So much for bedside manner. In an ironic twist, even Dr. Geiger, who had consistently downplayed the severe epidemic, contracted the disease on October 14th. 8 days later, his wife died of it. Heroism and sacrifice were not limited to the medical community. Many others were stricken with disease. In the Centennial History of Southern Arkansas University, James Willis notes, quote, when the campus cook became sick, a student, Carl McCullum, who had been a stove boy, assumed responsibility for preparing meals. There was no campus nurse. A sophomore, Bess Lowe, worked day and night caring for those with the flu. There's a particularly moving episode. I'd like to read you an excerpt from this. It's from the book, The War at Home. This is about a woman named Nina Byram Stevenson. And this is what it says. When the epidemic hit Eberts, a small community of fewer than 200 located just south of Harrison in Boone County, our local doctor asked 38-year-old Nina Byram Stevenson to look after a family that contracted the flu and had no one to take care of. Despite being warned to, quote, be selfish and not risk exposure to the disease, this mother of 6 children ranging in age from 6 to 18 agreed. Due in no small part to her unselfish efforts, all members of the family recovered. But Nina Stevenson contracted the disease and was confined to bed at her home. Stevenson's granddaughter, Nan Snow, remembered, quote, as Christmas drew near, she became steadily worse. Realizing the dire nature of her situation, she called her 2 youngest daughters to her bedside on Christmas Eve, 1918. She gave each of them a gold locket and a gold chain and told them she loved them and hoped they would be good girls and to mind their daddy. Nina Stevenson died on December 30th. She was buried at Crossroads Cemetery near Harrison. And Nan Snow recalled, quote, her family would forever remember watching in disbelief as a black buggy bearing her body made its way to the cemetery, carrying yet another casualty of this deadly epidemic in Arkansas. Well, if the pandemic or the epidemic brought out the best in many people, it also brought out the worst in others. The biggest indication of this was in the flourishing of so-called remedies for the flu. This is an ad from the Pine Bluff Graphic, December 3rd, 1918. Influenza gets old and young, and it asks us to profit by the example of thousands like Mrs. Mary Kirby from Spokane, Washington, who writes, quote, our little boy found relief in wonderful Foley's honey and tar. It surely cured me. I am 75 years old, had very bad cough from La Grippe. You can get it at Man Pharmacy. Here's a new cure for the flu. This is a particularly interesting one. This is the Arkansas Democrat, October 22nd, 1918. Dr. George Kimball, who discovered the lignite fields underlying 50 square miles in Ouachita County many years ago, and has spent the last 30 years experimenting with the coal and its products, declares it vapor of lignite oil as a cure for influenza. Dr. Kimball has treated a number of cases with splendid results. The oil is vaporized by heating over a lamp or on a stove and boils easily at ordinary heat. One of my favorite ads, and apparently one of the most popular, was this one, Brunson's famous prescription. We started taking Brunson's famous prescription, the Great Restorative. And if you read this, down in Louisiana, where the flu has been raging for several weeks, the people were in a terrible plight. Scores of people were dying, hundreds were in dangerous condition. And then someone discovered that a few people who were taking Brunson's famous prescription for general rundown condition had not caught the disease. As for the others taking it, it was soon learned that Brunson's famous prescription was an ideal preventative against infection from influenza. Well, it was not all the curatives that were advertised here. This one says, has the flu added increased expenses, burdens to your living expenses? Prepare for another emergency by letting us write you a health and accident policy. The cost is low, the benefit's great. Now, let us explain now before winter puts you in bed. And they style themselves as, quote, hazard experts. One of the most unique explanations for the origins of the flu came from a medical journal, which just proves that, as the late Carl Sagan once said, intellectual brilliance is no guarantee against being dead wrong. This was when Dr. Albert J. Croft of Chicago expressed the opinion that the influenza was caused by poison gas, which had come across from the battlefields of Europe. I advanced the theory that the condition termed influenza is in reality a non-bacterial, non-contagious disease caused by inhalation of small amounts of depressing highly irritating, high-density gas present in the atmosphere, especially at night and when it's moist. Well, so much for that. Well, what's the legacy then of the flu, the Spanish flu in Arkansas? Worldwide, it's estimated that it's perhaps as many as 500 million people died. That's about a third of the global population in 1918. And then between 50 and 100 million of those people who had contracted the disease died. Asians were 39 times more likely to die than Europeans. The pandemic had some influence on the lives of everyone alive today. One historian has noted, quote, more children under 9 died in the U.S. in 1918 than during the next 25 years combined. In a span of 12 months, the average U.S. life expectancy dropped almost 12 years. And this graph shows the death rates by month, and you see again the dramatic spike there in October of 1918 and how much it exceeded that of the previous year. In New York City, a relatively young man named Friedrich contracted the disease, fell ill while walking down the street, was taken to his home where he soon died. He was 49 years old. His death meant that his fortune passed to his son Fred, who used it to establish a New York property empire, which he then passed on to his son Bob. In her book, Pale Rider, Laura Spinney attempts to collate what is known about the pandemic and to take a stab at examining its legacy. The flu scuffed the human populations more radically, she says, than anything since the Black Death. It influenced the course of World War I and arguably contributed to World War II. It pushed India closer to independence, South Africa closer to apartheid, and Switzerland to the brink of civil war. It ushered in universal health care and alternative medicine, our love of fresh air, and our passion for sports. In the United States, Italian immigrants died at twice the background rate, while black populations were least affected. As far as the flu is concerned, whites had the whole show, one black writer wrote in the Baltimore African-American press. First effective flu vaccines would not be available in the 1930s, and electron microscopes that year. And people who survived would return to normal lives, albeit with an increased fear that another new disease, or even an old disease, might appear without warning. In Arkansas, Nancy Hendrix has cited a 2007 study that indicated that merchants in Little Rock saw their business decline by 40%. Others estimated it as much as 70%. Retail grocery business was reduced by a third. Little Rock businesses lost $10,000 a day, which would be almost $50,000 a day in today's money. Only businesses to experience an increase with drugstores. The outbreak may have influenced the Arkansas election of 1918 on a proposed new state constitution, which included measures for women's suffrage and prohibition. Babies born in utero in 1918 had a higher rate of physical disability and lower incomes throughout their lives. Children of infected mothers were 15% less likely to graduate from high school. Arkansas would have to wait less than a decade for its next big disaster, the Great Flood of 1927, and then only 2 more years for the onset of the Great Depression. And of course, the flu would reappear periodically. In 1957, it was the Asian flu, in 68, 69, the Hong Kong flu, and in 2009, the swine flu. And of course, the current pandemic with which we're dealing now. It still remains to be seen whether this current epidemic will match the toll taken by the Spanish flu and other changes wrought by the great epidemic of 1918. That's all I have. I'll be happy to try to take some questions. Good. But I'm not hearing you. I can hear you on the phone now. Okay.
Okay. Okay, now start the video.
Okay.
Here we go.
Yeah. So far, at least, the COVID-19 coronavirus is not reached anywhere near the deaths that came with the flu of 1918, but there are a lot of similarities. And as you can tell, I think, from the presentation, there were certainly a lot of similarities in the response. The response on just about every level was to ignore it until it was too late, try to play it down. At that time, when governments did try to start taking action, it was too late. But of course, we're a long way from the end of this one, so we'll have to see. Barely. Okay, good.
So the next question. I don't know how many times I've said, oh, technology. Okay. The next question is, like that. But we have seen resistance to the idea of closing churches during the pandemic. Was there any
That's a really good question, guy, and the answer is I don't know the answer to that. It doesn't seem to have appeared much in the press, if there was. And of course, we're in such a different time today than we were then, with so many more outlets to get access to news. But in the articles that I've seen, I haven't seen a lot about the resistance to the measures that were taken. I'm sure there was some, but it just doesn't come across in the press the way it has so far in this coronavirus.
Okay, maybe that's better. Can you still hear me, Dr. DeBlack?
No, just on the phone.
Okay, just on the phone, that's fine. It's not making feedback, which is important. Okay, so the next question is, this is again from Guy. For so many people to have died in this pandemic, there seems very little in the way of cultural artifacts. No novels or movies or any real monuments. Any thoughts on why that might be?
No, I haven't really thought about that. That's a really good question. There have been some really good studies, some nonfiction studies. I just alluded to 2 or 3 of them, and there's several more. But that's a really good point. Why this didn't make a greater impact in terms of fiction? The only thing I can think of is that you're coming out of such a huge event in World War I that may have overshadowed the pandemic, even as great as the pandemic was. But no, that's just a guess. I really don't know.
Okay, the next question is from a Heather. We have actually several Heathers on this call, which is interesting. Having gone through this history, what similarities do you see with the COVID-19 pandemic we are going through now in Arkansas, nationally, and globally? I think you may have already really answered that.
Let's talk a little about that, but the fact that isolating oneself from other people, they seem to understand that you needed to stay away from everybody, to be selfish, as said, prevented the spread. And what I find really interesting about this whole story is the fact that John Berry talks about in his book, that if it had not been wartime, with all these people moving around, this might have died out. Now think about that. Something like 500 million people, or 50 million people, might never have taken place if it had not been wartime. And that's just that's a staggering thing to think about. But I'm not obviously personal contact, just as it is with this, was the main driver of this this virus. So it seems.
Okay, the next question is, oh, Guy was telling me there's a question. Okay, one of the problems with COVID seems to be that it can be spread by asymptomatic people. Was this true also for the 1918 flu?
I'm a doctor, but I'm not that kind of doctor. My sense of it was that we talked about people being asymptomatic, and there were certainly people here, both in Arkansas and throughout the nation, throughout the world, who had very light cases of this disease, and obviously it killed many others. And again, as I pointed out earlier in the presentation, it did not correspond to the traditional pattern of just taking the very old and the very young. Interestingly enough, watching the news today, we're seeing a burst of infections now in the United States in younger people. So it hasn't been to the extent of this flu yet, and hopefully it won't get there. But now the fact that it also gives me some pause is that there were people, as I said, who got infected more than once. So having the disease was not necessarily a guarantee that you wouldn't get it again. You wouldn't get a little different strain of it. But it affected, as all these things do, it's very capricious. It affects people in so many different ways, and some people hardly knew they had it, and others were killed by it. So that's beyond my level of knowledge. But it's an interesting point, interesting comparison of the two.
Well, that is all the questions we have for today, or for you right now. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for your patience with the tech stuff. Oh wait, we do have one more question really quick. The fact that there was repercussions in people's health for generations in 1918, do you think we will see the same in this pandemic? You're going to get MD by the end of this.
Yes. One of the things, again, just reading some articles the other day in the newspaper, people were asymptomatic, and they thought, well, okay, I'm asymptomatic, I'm not going to have, but what they're finding now is some of these people that are asymptomatic do have problems that may manifest themselves later on in life. And again, I think there's so much that's unknown about even now about the coronavirus, whether that's going to be the same or true or not. But I suspect that it will. Again, I think it's dangerous to make too close comparisons between the two, but there are certainly a lot of things, both in the disease response to it, that do tend to match up.
Okay, well, thank you again for doing this. We really, really appreciate it. For participants, you will receive a survey tomorrow morning. Please take the survey. Tell us what you thought about the presentation. You can maybe even give us some tips on how to make the audio work better. Also, the next one of these Monday Maladies, the pandemic series from the Encyclopedia of Arkansas, is on July 6th. It's Disease in Civil War, Arkansas, with David Sesser from down in Arkadelphia. So we'll be back then. The YouTube live stream did not work today. I don't know why, another tech glitch. So we will have that up on YouTube in the next day or so. So if you did want to see it again, or you wanted to share it with somebody, we'll send that link out to everybody who participated. So you'll be able to do that. So thanks, Dr. DeBlack. Thanks everybody for participating, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.